Exciting! Neo Geo! Max 330メガの劇的体験 Neo Geo System SNK.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric, and we're continuing the series Neo Nostalgia, where I take a look at some of my favorite Neo Geo AES and MVS games of all time. And today we're playing The Last Blade, and this game is just spectacular. Basically, it's a spiritual successor to the Samurai Shodown series, and what it does incredibly well in both the graphics, the soundtrack, and the gameplay departments. It's just one of those games that is perfect from start to finish. Before we get too far involved there, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like, subscribe, and that notification bell definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But jumping right into the game, I skipped the character selection screen. Mechanically, you have a quick and a heavy attack, and you've got a decent roster of characters. But right off the top, this game just looks spectacular. I will talk about the gameplay in a moment, but I just can't get over how good this game looks for 1997. And this looks like something if you released it tomorrow, reviewers would be raving over the pixel art and the sprites and the backgrounds. All of these autumnal leaves falling to the ground and scattering around your feet as you jump around. It's just filled with details. This feels like a special game, like SNK really wanted to flex all of their development muscles and everything they've learned with the Neo Geo to give us something absolutely incredible, and The Last Blade does not disappoint in any way, shape, or form. But mechanically, it is a weapons-based fighter, and if you've ever played a Samurai Shodown game, you're going to pretty much understand it off the top. And if you've never played a Samurai Shodown game, trust me, it's not that hard to learn what's going on here. You have 4 buttons. D is deflect. You can deflect an attack and open up your opponent to an attack as well, but I love playing with the heavy style. I've always enjoyed that more than speed in The Last Blade. But again, when I talk about just how special this game is, this is one of my favorite backgrounds in any Neo Geo fighting game of all time. It may be one of my favorite backgrounds in and of itself. This kind of half Japanese, half Western town where you've got the American businessman wearing a suit and you have different Asian characters in traditional clothing. It's mixing that Western and that Eastern influence, and it's doing such a great job of it. It almost feels like the fighting game version of like a 1970s kung fu movie where they marry East and West together. But what I love about this game, outside of how beautiful it looks and how great the soundtrack is just how it plays. It's responsive, it's quick, everything feels incredible. When you're playing well, you know you're doing a good job, and when you're not playing well, you know you're missing things, because if I had whiffed that big wind up there, I would have opened myself up for a really heavy attack from my opponent. But Yuki here, you'll see, has a much longer weapon, and that's the thing. Each character has their own weapon, and the range varies. Somebody like Yuki has that longer attack, but maybe it doesn't hit for as much damage, but you can kind of poke at your opponent and keep them a little bit further away than you normally would. You get to pick what type of gameplay style you want to use and how you want to play the game, and the game really does cooperate with you. But moving back to Amano here against Yuki, you'll see that staff is much shorter, but I can get more hits in on it, and they can hit for a little bit more damage. But this snowfall here just coming down slowly as you walk across it, I will let you listen to the soundtrack in a few moments, but some places in this game actually have music, and some just have more like ephemeral background noises of what you would expect to see when you were playing. And moving down into the ship here as well, the artist did such a great job with shading and color, how that gets darker where the light isn't coming in through the windows. They had a preternatural sense of how light would strike a scene, and I know you're not going to usually hear that in a review for a game, but as a filmmaker that really matters to me. And the fact that the light's actually falling accurately on this is just spectacular. This game is beautiful, it sounds great, it plays great. It is an 11 out of 10 in my book, but I told you the soundtrack was awesome as well, so go ahead and listen for like 45 seconds or so, and I'll come back and sing The Last Blade Praises more. Enjoy!
さてさて真剣勝負1本目始めあら
So you have heard there that the game has a soundtrack, and it also doesn't have a soundtrack. And I know some people are going to be thinking that was just a cheap way to not make as much music for the game. But the fact that you get both musical score as well as those background noises in that little western Japanese town there that you can hear the people talking in the background, that soundscape does as much if not more than if you actually had a traditional soundtrack for the game. And of course, because this is a fighting game, you're going to get a little bit of a story, and I swear this is not a Castlevania section right here, although it does look a lot like Rondo of Blood. Even the cutscenes and the story that you get, they are quite fun. Again, I'm playing the Japanese version just because that's what I like to look at, but the story is relatively decent. It's nothing better or worse than you would expect from a fighting game. And first we had Castlevania, now we're getting a little bit of Terminator vibes going on here. The T100 coming out of the ground, or whatever T number he has. I probably got that wrong. Leave me a comment down below. But getting right back to the fighting again, I just love how this game feels. It's relatively faster than Samurai Shodown. I feel like maybe 10-15% faster, and I enjoy that. Trust me, you will be seeing Samurai Shodown show up on this series if you haven't already. But if you had to let me pick one game to play, if you told me I could either play Samurai Shodown 2 or The Last Blade, I would pick The Last Blade. That might be a little bit of a controversial opinion, but I think it might be pretty close down the line, 50-50 as to what people would rather play if they were given one choice. But the fact that we have two incredible options on the Neo Geo in and of itself means that we have a lot to pick from. Now, if you do want to play this game, you have a ton of options to play, and each one's actually really good. You have the Neo Geo AES version, which if you want a Japanese copy, would be considered cheap to Neo Geo standards these days. I looked and it was like $500 to $600. Now I paid $100 for this, but I paid that about 10 years ago, so I definitely got a deal. It's also available on pretty much every modern platform. There's a PlayStation 2 compilation as well with The Last Blade 2, and trust me, The Last Blade 2 is incredible. I love that game as well. I just love the original a little bit more, but if this series continues to do how I hope it does, maybe I'll add a Last Blade 2 bonus episode as well. So leave me a comment down below and tell me if you want to see that bonus episode. But again, just getting back to the overall look, vibe, and gameplay of The Last Blade, even the intro screens are amazing. It kind of reminds me of Mark of the Wolves. You can see a little bit of that same stylistic nature in there, and of course both made by SNK. There's definitely going to be some shared inspiration, but this is one of my other favorite backgrounds. That sunset golden hour in the background with those little birds flying through it, those are just details that don't need to be there. They're not adding that much, just a little extra touch, but if they weren't there, no one would have ever complained about it whatsoever. And you'll see Lee here is an extremely fast character, and he's going to give it to me a little bit harder than the rest of the characters so far, and I think I maybe just made an innuendo there, so leave me a joke in the comments. But that's the great thing about this game. Even though it's weapons based, you have some characters that are just much faster. He has a fan, but he feels much more like a traditional fighting game, like a King of Fighters, Mark of the Wolves, or even a Street Fighter. And that's the great thing. If you're just not clicking with the weapons-based fighters, you definitely can use somebody else. And you'll see I was just able to avoid his special there with proper movement, and that's always a fun feeling. When you're playing this game well and everything's clicking, you feel like you're invincible, and that's the great thing. And it does have a relatively deep moveset as well, and great mechanics. Of course, a fighting game made by SNK. That's exactly what you're going to expect out of them, and it delivers. And there are fatalities as well. They're not the most violent thing in the world. They're definitely not going to rival Mortal Kombat, but I did just cut him in half with that weapon, and you saw his torso slide from the top to the bottom of his body, and that is just a ton of fun. But moving on to stage 8 here with this opening as well, it's just another really fun piece of art with all these glowing candles. It almost looks like it actually is affecting the light there. Now of course it's a 2D game, there is no 3D screen space, so those lights are just drawn in pixel art. But the fact that they went through and animated that to make it look like it was actually glowing is so incredible. You can tell that the team at SNK loved this game and wanted to put their heart and soul out into the arcade so people could enjoy this. And if you believe the internet, it's always hard to say, apparently this was the #1 best selling and played game upon its release. Although you don't hear it in the same conversation as something like Mark of the Wolves, and I definitely think it would be fair to include that in there. If I want to play one Neo Geo fighting game, and maybe it's Mark of the Wolves, maybe it's King of Fighters, maybe it's The Last Blade, but The Last Blade is still part of that conversation when I play it. And moving on to the boss, you get a little bit of a cutscene here, and of course, because it is a game made by SNK, the boss is going to have to be incredibly difficult. That's always how it's going to be, and I'm sure if SNK makes fighting games in the future, it's always how it's going to be then as well. But yeah, that's The Last Blade. It's just a very special game. It has everything going for it, and everything is perfect. The gameplay styles, the character selection, the differences in how they play, and the learning mechanics are spectacular. The soundtrack is an excellent mix of actual music as well as ephemeral sounds from the soundscape of where those fights would be occurring, and you even get great sound effects off the weapons. And visually, I think this is one of the best looking fighting games SNK ever made for the Neo Geo. And of course, I'm gonna die because it's an SNK boss. But leave me a comment down below if you ever played The Last Blade, or do you plan on playing it after watching this video. I'll be back next Tuesday with a Neo Geo episode. I'll have videos throughout the week as well. But yeah, Last Blade, a perfect game. Bye bye.